It begins by highlighting the alarming issues plaguing the current generation, including an epidemic of failure, bullying, and physical and cyber attacks on students, which can have devastating consequences, such as suicide and self-harm. The story then shifts its focus to Sam Bradley, a 14-year-old high school freshman who has developed a daily routine to swiftly change his shirt and exit the locker room without drawing attention to himself after gym class. Then it turns out to Tommy's home, where his mother is perusing his grade report and expresses concern about his poor performance in 2 subjects. However, Tommy responds to her inquiries with a lack of enthusiasm and a dismissive attitude, downplaying the significance of his grades and implying that academics are not his strong suit. As their conversation unfolds, Tommy's mother becomes aware of his father's arrival and, panicked, hastily hands Tommy his report card, urging him to come up with a plausible explanation for his poor grades, then shifts to Sam's home, where his father is engrossed in a magazine and attempts to initiate a conversation with Sam about school. However, Sam remains unresponsive and promptly exits the room, heading upstairs. Moments later, Sam's mother arrives home and inquires about Sam's whereabouts. As she begins preparing dinner, Sam's father takes out the trash, illustrating the minimal communication and lack of collaboration that exists between them in their daily lives and shared responsibilities. Meanwhile, Chase and Tommy visit Chase's house, only to find his mother, Mrs. Cruz, unresponsive on the couch, having overdosed on pain medication. Tommy prepares to leave, but Chase's mother, still conscious, sternly warns him not to reveal the incident to anyone, despite Tommy's assurances that he will maintain confidentiality. As Sam walked down the school hallway, a classmate hastily abandoned him near the locker room, leaving him feeling anxious and uneasy. But before he could process his emotions, 3 intimidating bullies emerged from the crowd, their menacing presence causing other students to scurry away in hopes of avoiding their attention. The bullies closed in on Sam, hurling a derogatory slur at him before physically assaulting him. Shaken, Sam regained consciousness to find his parents by his side. However, despite their concern, he was too fearful to identify his attackers. The school's guidance counselor, Mr. Ross, expressed frustration over the school's inadequate response to violence, which often amounted to little more than a slap on the wrist. Meanwhile, the person responsible for taking action, presumably the school administrator or principal, was aware of the identities of the perpetrators but refused to take decisive action. Her coworker urged her to take a stand and punish the bullies, but she remained hesitant, citing the lack of concrete evidence and the absence of security cameras. Instead of taking responsibility, she opted to downplay the incident, assuring Sam that no action would be taken due to the lack of proof. Then it turns to Hunter's residence, where a heated argument between his parents has escalated into a violent confrontation. Seeking refuge, Hunter retreats to his bedroom, locks the door, and releases his pent-up emotions through a raw, high-energy hard rock song. The intensity of the music mirrors the turmoil he feels, and he pounds on the door in frustration. Meanwhile, at the Bradley household, Sam's father attempts to have a heart-to-heart conversation with his son. He opens up about his own experiences with bullying in the past, sharing a poignant anecdote about a former tormentor who now works as a car washer. Sam's father encountered this person while getting his car washed, and the encounter served as a stark reminder of how their lives had taken different paths. Despite their differences, Sam's father expresses his desire to be a good parent and to improve, inviting Sam to join them for dinner. As Mr. Bradley exits Sam's room, he leaves his son to his thoughts. When the security footage identifies the bullies, Tommy's father unleashes his fury on his son, despite his mother's frantic pleas to stop. The father believes that his wife is spoiling Tommy and continues to berate him, demanding to know why he participated in the attack. In a desperate bid to deflect the punishment, Tommy pathetically claims that the bullies targeted Sam because he was looking at them in the shower. This revelation only serves to further unsettle Tommy's father, who becomes visibly uncomfortable. In a shocking display of misplaced priorities, Tommy's father storms into the principal's office, not to apologize or express remorse, but to defend his son's actions and imply that Sam was somehow to blame. He argues that boys need to be allowed to fight and settle their differences physically, lest they become sissies. This outrageous justification only serves to perpetuate a toxic culture of aggression and intolerance. As a result of the incident, the bullies are ultimately suspended from school. However, the consequences of their actions are far from over. When Sam steps off the school bus, he is confronted by Tommy, who attempts to intimidate him further, warning that he will continue to face beatings unless he modifies his behavior. Sam, still traumatized by the ordeal, is too terrified to listen and flees in fear, desperate to escape the relentless torment. However, Tommy's aggression proves too much, and Sam flees in terror, racing towards the safety of his home. He locks the door behind him, still reeling from the bully's vicious taunts that continue to echo in his mind. The trauma of the attack and the relentless insults prove too much for Sam to bear, and he becomes overwhelmed by dark thoughts. He rushes into his house, his mind racing with flashbacks of the brutal attack, and begins to write a heartbreaking suicide note. In a state of utter despair, he searches for a way to escape the pain and finds his father's gun in a cupboard. Standing in a state of hopeless fear, he takes the devastating step of shooting himself in the mouth with the gun. Next, a series of 4 inspirational testimonials, as individuals share their own personal struggles with suicidal thoughts during their childhood and teenage years. However, instead of succumbing to the darkness, they found a way to overcome their challenges and go on to lead rich, fulfilling lives as adults. Recording themselves, they offer words of encouragement and hope to high school students, parents, and anyone who has faced bullying, cyberbullying, or cruelty due to their appearance. They assure them that these difficult times will pass, and what matters most is persevering through the struggles with strength and resilience. The Bradley household is in a state of shock and grief as the police depart, leaving Mrs. Bradley with a sense of emptiness and despair. She wanders listlessly around the house, her eyes fixed on the blood-stained rug, a poignant reminder of the tragic event that has shattered their lives. The news of Sam's suicide has spread like wildfire, and the town is now besieged by the press, who have become the new bullies, insensitive and relentless in their pursuit of a sensational story. Meanwhile, at the school, Mr. Ross, the guidance counselor, is engaged in a heated argument with the principal over the circumstances surrounding Sam's death. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the principal remains obstinate, refusing to acknowledge that the relentless bullying at school was the primary cause of Sam's suicide. She is equally opposed to any further ceremony or tribute to Sam, deeming the student's suspension and subsequent vacation sufficient punishment. Her callous attitude is a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. In a separate meeting, the mothers of Hunter and Chase confer with the principal and guidance counselor to discuss the best approach to handling the press scrutiny. Hunter's mother is particularly vocal in her complaints, insisting that her son had no involvement in Sam's suicide and that the blame lies elsewhere, perhaps with Sam's family dynamics. Her words are a stark reminder of the denial and lack of accountability that can often accompany tragic events. However, Mr. Ross reveals a shocking truth, producing a note written by Sam before his tragic suicide, in which he explicitly states that he was suffering at school due to the relentless bullying. The school principal is forced to acknowledge this painful reality, and the mothers of Hunter and Chase are overcome with emotion, tearfully apologizing for their son's involvement in the bullying. They take responsibility for their son's difficult upbringings, acknowledging that their own failures may have contributed to their children's cruel behavior. Meanwhile, the press attempts to question the school principal about the incident, but she refuses to provide any answers, choosing instead to maintain a stony silence. Mr. Ross, the guidance counselor, is left with a heavy heart, haunted by the thought of which student might be the next to succumb to the pressures of bullying and take their own life without him being able to intervene. The following day, the press descends upon Mr. Sampson, Tommy's father, seeking answers about his son's role in the bullying. However, Mr. Sampson responds with hostility, accusing the press of twisting the story and unfairly vilifying his son. He becomes aggressive, yelling at them to leave his property and refusing to engage in a constructive conversation about the incident. The press continues its relentless pursuit of a story, arriving at the Bradley household to inquire about the contents of Sam's final note. However, Mr. Bradley, still reeling from the loss of his son, is unable to cope with their intrusive questions and slams the door shut in frustration. Meanwhile, the bullies, still on suspension, engage in a callous discussion about Sam's suicide, attempting to absolve themselves of any responsibility for the tragedy. Their indifference to the devastating consequences of their actions is a stark reminder of the lack of empathy and accountability that can exist in certain individuals. Later that evening, the community comes together to mourn the loss of Sam and to hope for a better future. However, the somber atmosphere is short-lived, as the Bradley family is ambushed by the press on their way back from the memorial service. The reporters bombard them with insensitive questions about Sam's personal life, sexual orientation, and the circumstances surrounding his suicide. One reporter's thoughtless query, "Can you tell us who Sam Bradley was?" strikes a particularly raw nerve with Mrs. Bradley. The use of the past tense, was, serves as a harsh reminder of her son's passing, and she is suddenly overwhelmed by a flood of memories of the boy she loved and lost. The Bradley family manages to escape the press, but the reporters are already preparing to move on to their next sensational story, leaving the bereaved family to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Mr. Bradley attempts to offer solace to his grief-stricken wife, but she rebuffs his efforts, telling him to leave her alone. The fragile bond that held their marriage together has finally been severed, and Mrs. Bradley is left to confront her sorrow alone. Mr. Bradley, overcome with emotion, retreats to Sam's bedroom, where he is met with a sea of reminders of his son's life. He breaks down in tears, surrounded by Sam's belongings, and is consumed by a mix of emotions: anger at his son for taking his own life, and guilt towards himself for not being a better father, for not raising Sam to be strong enough to face the challenges of the world. Later that night, the memorial site, once a symbol of hope and remembrance, lies still and quiet. Tommy, still grappling with the consequences of his actions, enters the site, carrying Sam's backpack. Suddenly he is overcome with emotion, and in a fit of rage and grief, he destroys the flowers that had been carefully placed there to honor Sam's memory. Left on his knees, clutching the mangled flowers, Tommy utters a haunting phrase, "You did this," a testament to the crushing weight of guilt and regret that now bears down on him.